Well, December 19th, 2025 was the day that the Epstein Files were supposed to be released, all of them, but instead we got a tiny fraction of what was legally required in what I would describe as the most shameless cover up in American history. I'm not going to rehash everything because the video would be like 5 hours long. I have a whole playlist linked down below. Everybody's welcome to watch that. But after repeated attempts at delaying or undermining the Epstein Files Transparency Act, efforts that were ultimately unsuccessful, the current Department of Justice and FBI administrations have decided that yes, they'll release some of the files, but no, they will not abide by the law, and they will instead execute a completely indefensible, obvious, and shameful cover up. I'm going to try to make this video as streamlined as possible. This right here is the actual Epstein Files Transparency Act, which is relatively short and rather concise. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the essential component is that this document outlines an extremely limited scope of redactions, and even if those redactions are justified, they have to be explained to Congress and cut down as much as possible. No later than 30 days after this law was enacted, the files were supposed to be released. That day was December 19th, 2025, and yet December 19th has come and gone with only a tiny, minuscule fraction of the content coming out, and what they did reveal wasn't even actually revealed for the most part. There's a playbook here, okay? A tried and true, multi-stage, consistently reinforced playbook where the administration takes existing public and previously unredacted information, blacks out a bunch of the text, and then shows it to the world as if they're doing something totally transparent or new. Something that no previous administration ever came close to, as they like to say. It's embarrassing, and yet even on December 19th, after an official law had been put on the books by Congress and begrudgingly signed by the president, because make no mistake, Trump fought tooth and nail against this bill every step of the way, right up until the point where he politically lost the battle and tried to save face by pretending he was always for it. Even after all of that, the DOJ has done the very same thing again. Just to once again hammer the point home, okay, I want to read a segment from the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Public Affairs in the Epstein Files fact sheet, which says, quote, "What is being redacted? The Department of Justice is committed to transparency and redacting only what is legally required. The department is required by law to redact identifying information about the victims, minors, or potential victims, as well as privileged material. No redactions have been or will be made to protect famous individuals or politically exposed persons," end quote. The spirit and the letter of the law is abundantly clear, and yet if you look at the actual document release itself, what they have done is the furthest possible thing from it. These right here are three entirely separate sequential documents, 6109, 6209, and 6309, totaling well over 250 pages, which have been completely redacted with not a single word visible across them. And that's even before we talk about the 119-page grand jury indictment, which is also blacked out completely, despite a December 10th court order by a federal judge that the grand jury records be made public. What we got, legitimately, on December 19th, that is, what happened over subsequent days is my next point to make. That's like the next section of the video. What we got on December 19th violated the law, period. All right. The Trump administration once again obfuscated records, held back important information, and dodged the Epstein issue. But when tens of millions of people are scrutinizing all of your actions, when you've lost the support of Congress on the issue, even when that congressional body is majority controlled by your own party, and when the appointed leaders of your agencies are so relentlessly incompetent, as is true with the current administration, getting away with a cover-up this lazy and obvious becomes pretty much impossible. One day after the concrete deadline, perhaps as a result of overwhelming pressure, perhaps as a result of professional failure, not entirely sure, but regardless, one day after the precise deadline, then we get the grand jury documents. Still redacted, but at least fundamentally readable now. And yet, that's not the only thing that they chose to do. See, on December 19th, they made 4 different document sets public and allowed them to be downloaded, which people obviously did. I myself got them, I think, like 19 minutes after they went up. Hundreds of thousands of eyes began combing through all of these documents, many of them specifically seeking mention of Donald Trump, obviously, and yet there was basically nothing. Here and there, sure, a passing mention, but then people realized that 19 files had been removed after the fact. 164, 165, 167, 229, 384, 468, 656, 657, 1051, 1052, 1053, 1055, 1056, 1124, 1423, 1424, and then batch 1 LFP, DII, and LST, which are the text files that contain a complete list of the files in that batch. Most of these were photographs that include specific naked or suggestive paintings, all right? However, tucked away inside that batch of deleted files, people found this one, 468. It's a photo of a desk, and then inside the open drawer of that desk is another photo, this time of Donald Trump and four unknown young women. Confusingly, it seems like his crotch in that photo has been cut out of it, but whatever the reason may be, social media users immediately latched onto it because it's not a photo that we've seen before publicly. Speculation began, opinions swirled, but then gone. The photo disappeared alongside the others from the public database. As you can see in an archive right here, file 468 is now gone, and people justifiably went berserk. It's a bit difficult to cover the topic all in one sitting because there's a pre-existing knowledge base that you kind of need to have in order to fully understand, I guess. But the short version is that we know from FOIA requests, right, documents made public by the FBI, that they had something like 1,000 agents working almost $1 million worth of overtime, thousands and thousands of hours, specifically to redact Donald Trump from the files. And now one of the only tidbits of information relating to him in particular had been blatantly scrubbed as well, even so far as the raw text file lists from that specific batch, and that specific batch only. Looking at this objectively, it is a complete and total failure. They missed the legal deadline, obviously. They published a tiny fraction of what's actually required. Most of the files have not been made public yet, or possibly ever. We don't know what they'll delete or why or when. They heavily redacted almost everything, flagrantly violating the law and their own public statements, and then openly, right in front of everyone's faces, pulled down one of the only fragments or tidbits that showed Donald Trump in a photo of a photo in a desk drawer. That's about as on the nose as you can possibly get. Let me ask a question though. What's the only thing they could realistically do to make it even worse after the fact? What's the only move they have left, which would make it even more obvious how badly they're trying to get away with an incompetent cover-up? Yes, that is correct. Once they get caught pulling the image down, despite absolutely no legal or justifiable reason to do so in the first place whatsoever, once they get caught taking it down, you put it back up again and pretend, oops, just an innocent mistake, because way too many people noticed what they did. That is exactly what happened. The file is now back. 468 is visible in the first dataset again, but that doesn't change the fact that we watched them panic, pull files, and the corresponding index lists as well. That's the incriminating part, in my opinion, only to then put them back up when the entire world reacted and said, we just watched you do that. What the fuck are you doing? But there's a worse problem. Even if you take everything that the current administration says at face value, which you can't, obviously, but even if you did do that, the standing deflection of we're just protecting the victims falls apart immediately. The narrative they want you to believe is that all of these heavy-handed redactions, as in hundreds and hundreds of pages fully blacked out, only pertain to victim private information. But here, you can see a photograph of Bill Clinton and Michael Jackson with 3 redacted children. Just to be clear, Bill Clinton is heavily featured in a lot of these files and pictures. And I think that's the entire point, by the way. We need to remember that this is a tiny, minuscule, and extremely curated sample of the Epstein files that have been handpicked by the current DOJ for release. Of course they feature Bill Clinton, front and center. And just to be clear, that doesn't make him innocent. If there's any evidence whatsoever, I say lock him up for life. But they chose these files, so naturally, I think it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, naturally, they would heavily feature political enemies. Anyway, this photo of Bill Clinton, Diana Ross, and Michael Jackson isn't actually from the Epstein files. It's a public photo from a fundraiser a long time ago with Ross Jackson and their own children. Yet, the DOJ has included this and then redacted these children as if they were Epstein victims. No matter which way you look, it's total and complete incompetence, deception, or most likely a combination of both. According to Fox News directly, quote, the Justice Department redacted the names and identifiers of victims. Fox News Digital has learned that the same redaction standards were applied to politically exposed individuals and government officials, end quote. And whether or not you even believe that's true, it puts the largest conservative news network in the nation and their credibility in direct contradiction of what the current conservative administration has been saying. This is not a good situation for anyone involved. Supposedly, there's articles of impeachment being drafted against Attorney General Pam Bondi right now. Congress would use something called inherent contempt, which is a lot more difficult to get around in terms of pardons. But I honestly don't know if it has teeth to it, and even if it does, Pam Bondi is just a foot soldier. There's an entire political apparatus behind her that made this happen and used her to do it. And so without deep consequences for all of them, it's unlikely anything actually changes. A group of Epstein victims, actually, in a joint statement right after the files were released, big air quotes around those words, openly condemned the entire thing because you can't have it both ways. You cannot simultaneously claim that Epstein never trafficked to other people, that there's no credible evidence of such whatsoever, and that if there were, you would immediately bring a case. But then at the very same time, expect people to believe that the Epstein case is such a hazard to national security that you have to black out hundreds and hundreds of consecutive pages fully and fight against the calls for public transparency like wild political animals. It cannot exist both ways. The entire thing is a circus of the darkest kind, so to speak. Just glancing at the now centralized Epstein Files hub, you immediately see that the first phase section is a bunch of previously available further redacted info showing nothing that was given to those conservative puppet moron influencers for a photo op a while ago. The BOP footage is riddled with errors, inconsistencies, and shows people coming and going who shouldn't exist or supposedly weren't there, with jump cuts and questions about evidence photos, layout, and file integrity. Plus, we already had all of that. The Maxwell Proffer segment is probably the worst part because it's just a transcript of her repeatedly lying, contradicting evidence photos, and then getting sent to a cushy facility with special treatment, despite being a twice perjured convicted sex criminal who doesn't actually qualify for that facility. She had to get a special waiver from the DOJ to be able to be sent there, which is insane. And lastly, the memoranda and correspondence section is all public shit we've seen before. Realistically, the only new documents in this whole thing are from Section 1, the Transparency Act, which they've now illegally flaunted and continue flaunting while redacting, deleting, or altering things in a way that should immediately result in prison time for a lot of people. That probably won't happen, but it should happen. Anyway, that's it. That's the current state of a shameful and continuing Epstein Files cover-up on display right now. It's probably going to go on for quite some time because they have so many hundreds of thousands of documents, and yet they're drip feeding them out with a whole bunch of redactions after violating the law and missing the deadline. So, I mean, it's just a continuing problem and just a total joke. I don't know. It's probably going to get worse in the coming days. I'll continue talking about it when, notable things happen. But for now, if you want to support the channel, there's links down below. Special VPN deal, locals and Patreon, etc., etc. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching. Question everything, and have a nice night.